Okay, so welcome back. This is the second day, and today's the day everything goes back together. Instruments in pieces, everything's been polished and cleaned and oiled, and now it's time to reassemble it, make sure we got all the parts, make sure everything's stuck on, make sure it plays in the end. So I guess first things first, since the end of the last video slash stream, I finished polishing the keys. It took me 2.5 hours or so. They were more tarnished than usual, and it's typically a pretty long-term thing. Also, right after the previous stream ended, I went over the outer body of the instrument with just a clean cloth to get some of the excess bore oil off of it. And that's something I'm going to do now at the beginning as well. I guess otherwise I started preparing a cork for redoing the vocal cork because frankly I've only replaced a vocal cork once and I don't feel like I'm that good at it, so I wanted to make sure I got it pre-done a little bit so it wouldn't take forever on stream. But yeah, as I said, you start by just getting any excess oil specifically off of the tone holes here. Because if you get oil on pads, it can kind of mess with them, it can kind of make things stick. It's not good for it in general. And there should be very little residual since their coat initially was only thin. But it's good to have. You can also just kind of get a little bit off the body if it feels like it's slippery. These don't really, which is correct since I wiped that off yesterday, really. But everything's nice and shiny. For as tedious as the work of polishing everything is, it has not been this shiny in a year and a half. It looks a lot better this way. And I didn't really discover any heinous problems with anything when I was polishing up the keys, because you get a very good look at them as you kind of go through that stuff. And there's there's a piece of cork, a little tiny piece, you maybe see it on my finger, which I think came off of the alternate V-flat key that'll need replacing. There's a few felts that need to be reglued, maybe one or two that needs to be replaced. I should have the stuff for that at least. It's almost done. That was the right side. Oh yeah, and Twitch was not letting me update the stream information, so I might be able to get that in a second. Been having some issues today, it seems. This one actually does feel a little greasier than the other ones. I might have missed some of the spots in between posts or something. Alright. So they've been wiped off. I'm sure this is not important. Not really. Okay. So, the basics of the reassembly is really straightforward. You're just kind of doing the reverse of what you were doing before. I like to start with the bell because it's only got one. It's real easy. And then you've officially completed a quarter of the instrument, if you want to think of it that way. And as part of removing these, I generally got some of the old grease and all the grime that's in there off. But as you put it back on, wiping it down an extra time is not a bad thing, because it just kind of makes sure that there's less of it there when you start, and it'll gradually build up over time, and it probably won't build up to the point where it'll actually cause problems if you're doing this with some frequency, but it's nice to do. So for this kind of screw, the kind that goes through, I like to take the end of the screw itself, which there. You can kind of see against the white background, not so much against the other ones, and then dip it in the grease, which I talked about last time. It's probably easier to see on that one. This is green molybdenum grease, which is for CV joints in cars, generally. And it seems to work great. But you put a little bit on the tip, and then I twist it through to kind of get it like, I don't know, the little gaps around the screw as it goes in that have to be there for it to move. This helps to kind of draw it into it a little bit. And then very often, to kind of make sure it's all going through, the little bit that builds up behind the screw, if I don't let it all fall off onto my fingers, you can kind of get that blob in on the end of it and then push it through additionally. And it works pretty well. You basically just apply grease until it feels like you can spin it freely, and it doesn't give you any like resistance that way. If you can feel any scratching in there when you're pushing it through, then either there's still some grime or there's, you know, just not enough grease and it's kind of rubbing it away. You want it to feel very like fluid. And once you get to that point, there's probably enough grease for the whole thing. You don't have to do anything, at least for this kind of key, you don't have to do anything to like mount it on the instrument. So, take your screwdriver. I'm actually going to put this on the ground, I think. It's not the biggest table to work with. And I'll put this aside as well. So you get your key. This one has a spring on the bottom. If you can kind of see that sticking out there. And there's actually a little metal like well where the end of the spring goes. So you just kind of set it in place. You put the screw through and you screw it down. It's effectively very simple to do. Again, it's just one of those things that you have to do repeatedly to get the whole instrument back together. And if it works, if it fits, you'll still have the same like movement action that you had before. And if there was any like side-to-side play or rattling because of the metal on metal there, that kind of solves itself, which is great. One thing, and I should probably use another paper towel because this one is rather used. Actually, maybe I'll use this. Because we're applying a fair amount of grease, and the grease does squeeze out as you kind of like stick it in there, it is worth just kind of giving a once over to the ends of the post where the grease kind of went in, because it will squeeze out a little bit and it will get on things. I've actually found that the first few days of playing after this, you want to be careful how you hold your instrument against your clothes, because the grease will go from green to black from the grime and the metal bits and that kind of stuff that are in there, and then it'll come off right on the edge of the keys. So it's good to have an eye on things as you go. But this joint, the bell, he's done. There's as much that needs to be done to it this time. Since it didn't have any like felt work to reglue or anything like that, that's just fine. So I think long joint is up next, and it's got a lot more keys. This also has some that have to be done like doubled, like you have to do both at the same time, and it's got some that are, you know, overlapping on other things, so it's a little bit more complicated. If you get it wrong, you can just redo it, so it's not that bad, but to save time, I will try to do it the right direction. I think I know how to do that. Got those ones, got these two, got this. So I'll do this one first, I guess. Is this right? That goes under here? Yeah, this will work. Well, no, I'll leave this one off, because these ones will go under it. I think you can make it fit that way, but why bother? Why force it? This one, though, these two can go together. So these two are overlapping. They will be probably in most instruments, and one of them has the straight through screw, and one of them has the pivot screws in the end. And you apply grease in different ways for them. So I'll do the straight through one first, as I did the other one. Just get some on the end, and then you just work it through until it feels like it's smooth. It feels pretty good. And then with the ones that are based on pivot screws, oh, and this has got a peeling felt, which I think I want to reglue. It doesn't look like it's coming off. Alright, so that'll hold off for a second, because I'll glue this first. For gluing on felts and corks under things like this, like for the bumpers and stuff, it's typically done with contact cement, and this is actually pretty dry. It should be much more liquidy than this. I need to replace this. But since I'm using only it, like, I only need a little tiny bit of the end of this felt glued, and it's not a big felt. I'm just going to take a toothpick to get a little bit of the glue on it. This very stringy glue because it's so dry. And then what you do for contact cement, you apply it to both sides. You let it dry for, I don't know, 30 seconds or a minute, so till it gets tacky, but this is kind of already tacky. And then you press it together. And by bringing it together, it will stick to itself extremely strongly, and you should not be able to remove it after that. This is a weird technique to apply this because it's so gooey, but that's my own fault. I think the last time I got it, I only was able to get like a really large bottle of it, and I used so little of this stuff. Well, yeah, you wait just a second. Because the one side of this is felt and it's just like totally porous, it's probably not critical that you wait here. But that is how you're supposed to do it. It's what the directions say. It's how you're supposed to get the whole thing. And I'll be using this periodically because there's a bunch of felts that I know need to be stuck down. You give it a second, and then you press it together. And then it should not come off on its own. Though, I missed the other side. The other side is having the same issue. So let's do that. If you've got enough of it peeling off, like this one eventually showed me, it can be just worth to replace it. By adding the extra glue, you potentially harden the felt a little bit and make the smoothing action of it a little bit worse. So that's too dry now. But in this case, I'm not sure how critical it is. It hasn't been a particularly noisy felt to get out in the past. So I'm just going to try regluing it the easy way, the lazy way. But again, applying glue to the felt itself and then applying glue to the metal under it where it's going to make contact. Giving it just a second. And then pressing the two sides together. And as long as you're pretty sparing with the glue, it won't squeeze out on the sides. If it does, you can actually manipulate it a little bit because it sticks to itself much better than it sticks to other things. So once it's mostly dry and tacky, you don't have to worry so much about it sticking to your fingers. Just want to keep it off of the metal best you can. Keep it looking nice. But that should hold on. One of the nice things about the felts and bumpers under these is that they're basically going to be on the undersides of the keys only, and nothing's going to be poking at them from the side. So even if they're pretty loose, even if the glue is not making a great hold, they're probably going to hold on okay for, at least a while. So while you want to do a good job in sticking them down, if you don't have the glue or you don't have a replacement felt and you just have to kind of leave it there, odds are good that it won't just fall off on its own. It takes a fair amount of abuse before they just peel off. Anyway, now that that's glued, I can go back to greasing this and putting it back on the instrument. So for these pivot screw ends, I like to get a little dollop, if you can see, I don't know how easy that is to see, just a little dollop of grease on the end of that. Comparing to a pea doesn't make sense. Comparing to a grain of rice, it doesn't really make sense. This is a lot smaller than that. But you basically get enough grease to basically fill the end. The little cone-shaped divot that the pivot screw goes into on the end of the rod. You want to be basically filled, packed full of grease. Doesn't have to be exact. A little extra is just going to come out on the side. And most of what you pack in there is going to come out on the side. But that assures that there's plenty in it, which is important. Now we've got this one greased from before, and then we've got our new one greased. And we have to put these in at the same time because they kind of trap each other. This one traps this one in place. And we're going this way. This is also helpful to remember like how things are arranged on the instrument. You can kind of see here, if you're just looking at this area, unless you remember what it's doing, this can be hard to do. And actually, this is case in point, this is the wrong area. Because this is the larger bore, so this is the top end, which is actually for this key. This end, these two, is where this one goes. And then you've got this key, which covers the tone hole, which goes in this smaller one, and then this one that goes under it, because these are the two pinky keys on the side. So just being able to like remember what your instrument looks like, where your hands go, and what groups of keys look like, goes a long way for kind of figuring out which one is which. But that's also why you've laid them out on the table in a way that aligns to the holes on the instrument, because that's an extra reminder of it. So, to put this back on, you kind of go in reverse, figure out which screw you had loosened before, because if you left it, finger tight when you were just putting the screw back, it will matter. Like, you don't want to loosen the other one and then have both of your screws just be really loose. And for this key, as a demonstration, there is a spring here to kind of get around. So what I'm going to do is I took out the one pivot screw on one side. I'm coming in just to the pivot screw here, but above the spring, then moving the whole thing down close to the body of the instrument and hooking to engage the spring, just because it's convenient to do at the same time. And then you get the pivot screw on the other side. And now we can do this one. And if something about this was set up so that I could not add this key with this other one, because I don't have the other one screwed down all the way, it's easier to correct for. Though, speaking of this key also has a spring under it, and this is a much thicker spring. So if you can't get this one engaged as you put it in, you might have to like poke around under it to get it engaged, and with these thicker springs, they don't always have the clearance to get under the little parts that you're engaging the spring into. So it is useful to help kind of align this before, and I'll show you here. In this case, the spring moves very slightly out this way, so like towards, I don't know, oops, towards that side, down on the screen. So what I'm going to do is get this little nub that it's supposed to engage into, and I put that below it, and then slide the whole key up so that I can feel the resistance of the spring, and then put the pin into the other side. And you're looking for, where is it? Looking for the hole that it engages into, unless I'm on the wrong side. I don't think I am. There it is. Just took a second. And then once you're sure that it's down and that it's that the spring is engaged, you can just screw it in. And again, if you keep your finger kind of right at the edge of the screw head, it can help reset if it is sliding out of the slot, which is convenient because it takes a number of turns to get it in there, and you don't want it to just come out. Now we go to the other screwdriver, because this one is a pivot screw, so it needs a bigger one. You just screw it down till it's finger tight. You don't have to go to any extreme lengths. Then you go over the edges right near the posts to try to get any excess grease, and your key works okay. It's worth noting that this one, even though there's a spring there, does not do anything, and that's because the spring is sort of a return spring. It's also not engaged. This is going to be basically impossible to show on camera, but the spring is on the right side. It's just, instead of being in the bottom little notch that these things that they engage into have, don't know the technical term for them, it's slid up towards the rod, so the amount of leverage that it's exerting on that point is very, very low. So, just by sliding it down, I should be able to get it to engage on the other side. Either that, or it's actually on the wrong side of the post now, which might be, because it is on, nope, It sounds like it. I'm not getting any spring action on this. This might have actually been intentional. I'll have to check this as I go forward. It does look like it's engaged into the thing correctly now. But I did lighten up on a number of these springs. I think this is not a normal behavior for this key, but I seem to remember the key that it is connecting to, this long one, which I'll put on next, has a strong enough spring that it pushes it down anyway, and since it's the only thing that actuates it, by lightening up on this one, I got the whole action to feel easier to do, even though that key basically doesn't function on its own now, because the spring is too weak. This is another pivot screw kind of rod. Put it in here, since I took the pivot screw out of the top section. And like before, you've got this will be for the case for most of them, but you've got this spring sitting here, and this is another thick one that's pretty strong, pretty significant to press against. And the easiest way to do this is to just bring the key to the side where you can get it to engage on that spring, and then push it into place, flexing the spring. Because then you don't have to go back with the screwdriver or with the spring hook or whatever to re-engage the spring underneath it, which on a few keys is very difficult to do because of the clearance between the body of the instrument and the base of that little spring engage thing. I wish I had a name for it. I feel like I'm going to be talking about it a lot. But now, yeah. So, that what I said was true. This spring that is under here is quite stiff, and so even though this key on its own was barely, was not returning at all, if you keep this up, it does not actually push itself to either side. It just kind of takes where it's going and sits there. But this spring is so tight that this key is actually still pretty heavy with this one engaged. I also see just a little tarnish that I didn't catch. I went through this quarter of a sheet and then one entire other silver polishing cloth and getting the tarnish off this instrument, and I seem to have still missed some. There was also a couple of keys, maybe this is one of them, where the tarnish was kind of in like little pits, or there's some the thickness of the plating was not sufficient or that kind of thing. So you got areas that really didn't totally polish out. They got smoother, but they weren't all the way there. Anyway, I said I was going to do this one after these because it's under them. So maybe that's... I shouldn't do that one first. I should do these two. So this is another overlapping couple. You've got your low C key and then the low D key. And the trick is that this little paddle coming off of the low D key has to go under here, and there's a felt there where it contacts it under the pad, and that's how they're linked together. That means that they have to be put in like this, and you have to do both of them basically at the same time. And then these have to lie in the spaces cut for them here. So you've got your low C key tone hole, and then this area for the key itself, and then you've got this one which holds the D key. That's the right one. So they're both... I'll check the felts, because there's at least one of these that needs to be fixed as well. These look okay. This is also a good time to check pads to see if they're hard or if they're discolored or if they got grime on them or that kind of thing. These are on what side? So this one is... The C key is on the side facing me, the D key is on the other side. It doesn't really matter because you're going to pull these out anyway, but sometimes it's nice to get the screw heads in the right alignment. So make sure there's enough grease for it to feel smooth. Even if there's a little extra, that's not really a problem. It'll come out, you'll wipe it up. That actually feels pretty smooth, but it seemed like it was too little going in, so I'm going to add a little more anyway. Okay, so I think those are set. This one's going to have to be under, but this has to be under this, so I'll put them together to put them on. The other thing you have to be careful about with these group is that while you have both that you have to put in together, you don't really want to put the screws down just on like a cloth like this, because the screws are now fully greased, and if you put them down on the cloth, you might like lose some of that grease. So I'm putting them down in the same like positional arrangement they are on the instrument when I'll put them back, so I don't mix up which one is which. And then I'm going to be careful of the placement of this spring sticking down from the low C key, and make sure that ends up on this little metal pad in the notch there. You can kind of see it does all fit. You just have to stack it in the right order. And then once they're close, once you're close on these and they're in the right general spots, then you can take the screws and grab it from this side and put them back. And you really only need to slide them into place before you can work on them, because that will retain the keys fine. Then you just go back and screw it together. Oop. And this seems to have this screw seems to have a little bit of a wider slot cut in the top of it, so the screwdriver is actually slipping out quite a bit more than usual. I'm not applying much force, so if it slips, it's not going to do much damage if it does some, but it's not really the best setup. This one definitely fits tighter. Okay. That's all set. Now you can kind of hear that there's a key that is loose and just kind of dangling there. And normally, when you're assembling an instrument, that would be a very bad thing. In this case, it's the D key, and it's that the key we're going to add next, this one, is actually like holding it down with a spring. So it's supposed to be free spinning like this. There is no spring that engages into it when it's on its own. And because of the placement of the felts, the part that is hitting the body of the instrument and making the noise now is not actually ever going to hit it, because it's always going to have a counteracting force. It never flexes down that far. So, next key. This one I know can be a little bit of a problem on this instrument, just because the guard that it's fitting under is kind of a tight squeeze. So you have to kind of finagle it around a little bit. But it does fit. Put it on plenty of times before. It's too much. Okay. And this one also has another spring, and especially with this guard in place, it's been very difficult in the past for me to get the spring engaged. Oops. Gonna have to clean the carpet. And actually, let me redo that, because there could be crud on the carpet that I don't want to be on the screw. So replacing the grease it's easy. It's quick. Just a little more. That'll work. So that stays over there. And I was saying, putting the spring in place is difficult when you're first sliding the key in on this one, just because of the space in there. You can kind of get it close, but the important thing is that you remember that it's there and that you reset it before you screw it down. Because the reason if your instrument has these little like metal landing pads for these leaf spring, maybe, I don't know if they call them the flat springs on the instrument, maybe that's what they call them. The whole point is that it keeps it in place, but it also prevents it from being like a metal spring contacting a wooden body of the instrument. So they're also going to help prevent damage to the body and the finish. So you definitely want them to be properly engaged, even though they will work when they're not. Like, even though they'll spring when they're not, it won't be as good for the instrument in the long term. So something you want to be aware of. Get this one on. There it is. It's hard to get at as always. But now you can see that the low D key no longer rattles and is loose because it's got the top pressure from here and the bottom pressure from the C key. It's kind of fully constrained. And it's not entirely silent. And this is something when you're trying to diagnose whether you need to replace felts, this is going to be a good little thing. It will make a different noise when you press it down versus when you release it. So, and that's because it's actually contacting on different points. When you're pressing it down here, the noise you're hearing, at least on this key, is the noise of the pad hitting the surface of the tone hole. When you're releasing, on this key, it's actually because the back of this key here is contacting the guard. And I've had this problem before on this instrument. There's actually a little tiny piece of felt glued in there to silence this a little bit. It's not so significant that I find it like a really big issue in playing, but you can kind of tell. If you're pressing down the D key at a normal speed, you get much more noise on the upswing rather than the down. And yeah, I'm like, from the look of the guard, I think it might have just gotten bent at one point or something. And like the key fits in there fine, but not quite. But I'm not going to mess with that now. I don't think I need to. On to these two. And if you can hear it, there's some guitar happening upstairs. I will gradually get more space as these joints are completed. So, this one's an interesting one in that this is not usual for most instruments. It was not like this on the Fox that I had before this. But this key goes on this key. Like this part that goes out is actually the bearing for this one. Excuse me. And then there is a pivot screw that goes all the way through both of them. So I guess all the way through this one since the bearings are on the outside. So even though there's one screw here, I'm going to grease the outside of this tube as well, because this is effectively the like interior screw of the outer key, if that makes sense. Don't have to. It was a bit of a mistake, just because I don't want to be sticking my fingers into the grease directly. It is still propped up a little, but not by a lot. So I'm going to try to work it into this, and I think I actually want a little bit more. Keep that thing out. Even though it's well greased now. So I'm just applying grease to the outside of this so that the keys will be smooth in their action against each other. And then I'll grease the actual screw, the inside of it. That feels pretty good. We gotta find our spot, and this one's got two little guides for it. I think those are visible. And there's actually little bits of paper kind of where the guide sits on it. And then when it's lined up, you go ahead. Since this has one spring going down, you want to make sure that's engaged underneath it, and it is in the right place. So I can just put it down. Get the extra grease. There's a little extra on this one because of the kind of key on key part that was greased. That looks pretty good. And this one's relatively quiet because it's being constrained in its action. This one is not because it's hitting this key. The thing is that with the bell on, this can actually be demonstrated, there is a maximum height that this lever ever gets to. So it never actually makes that sound. Got one more key on this joint. This is another pivot screw based one. Looks like there's like a truck or helicopter maybe? Helicopter probably. So you can kind of see on this key, I don't know how well this comes across, but on this pad, it's an older style that has like a little, like a stitch in the middle just to kind of hold it together, but it also is slightly yellowed. And this one is actually a little bit hard. So I haven't had a problem with sealing on this instrument, but I'm pretty sure this is a size that I have not had in stock before, and since it is an old pad that is yellowed, I figured I'd take just an inventory of what I've got that probably should be replaced, and then look into buying appropriately sized ones, since I don't have a method of making them myself. So I got my calipers, 27 millimeters, and it looks like it's about, that is not the right number, okay. I think these need to have the batteries replaced. Because I close it and zero it and it says -4. That's not a good sign. I do have a spare though. I'll put that over here. Spare battery. Much brighter screen now too. Probably even legible in stream. Whereas before you had to get it like at the right angle to look at the LCD. This does fit, right? Almost. There we go. Okay. Zeroed. Let's measure this thing again, since it might not have actually been 27. It was not. It was 4 millimeters off. So I'm looking at... Yeah, I'll say 23. It could be 23.5, but I'll say 23 would be sufficient. You can also see when you're looking at a pad, you can see that like indent ring where it actually contacts the thing. And in a lot of these keycaps, you'll find that the actual like tone hole that it's covering is much smaller. So you can actually get away with using a smaller pad if you don't have the right size in stock. But in this case, it's pretty much the whole thing, so I don't want to get one that's too small or it just will not overlap the edges. Looks like it's about 3 millimeters thick. So I don't know what the standard sizes are. I don't think this instrument uses particularly standard sizes because it is a little bit older. But 23. And this is, what key is this for? This is low B. So I'll have a record of the pad sizes I need to get. And then I'll have a record of where they go. Because I'm just going to put it back on now. It should seal fine. But as I was saying, like, when they harden up, they can have issues sealing, but they also make more noise. Because there's, like, the more rigid contact that it makes when you're, slamming it down on the key does actually make a difference. And for this one, this is another one with a spring sticking out to the side. So if you kind of caught that, I don't know. Yeah, I'm not blocking it with that one. I kind of caught it, like I put this end of the rod onto the pivot screw. I caught the spring on this side, and then I moved it over to put it in this little catchment, whatever you want to call it. And then I put the pivot screw on the other side. We get the extra grease. Seems okay. The thing is that this actually, like, in terms of like key impact, I would say the low B is probably pretty similar. But I think it will get a little bit softer if you've got a softer pad in there, a newer one. So it is worth thinking about for later. But for now, that's 2 joints down, the easiest 2. Let's do the boot next. So in the same way that last time, the last thing that was off was the boot cap and the YouTube, I'm going to start with those ones. This is something that I've been told is not super standard among techs, but it's worked really, really well for me. Before you put it back on, give the bottom just a coat of cork grease. Just regular old cork grease like you'd use on your vocal or your tenons if you've got that kind of tenon. And just make sure that it's not like, built up anywhere or anything like that. But basically the stuff in cork grease helps keep the cork supple, which will help it maintain its seal better. It'll also act as a grease to be able to release the next time you want to service it. So you can, there is a risk of ripping the cork gasket on this when you pull it off the bottom of the instrument. But if you've got the cork grease on and you've done it recently, the risk is very low. I have never had a problem with my instruments, partially I think because I do this every year. And this goes for a lot of instruments. Actually, you can see, this is a demonstration. There's the 2 screws on the side to hold it down, and then there's these little alignment pins. And the way they're set up, if I get this alignment pin in here, and this one doesn't fit, then this is actually the reverse direction of the YouTube. And because they're done by hand, and because I believe they are very slightly different in diameter, actually, I can just figure that out. It would be simplest to make one that did not taper, but since the whole bore is tapering, 2.61, 2.75. Is that reliable? It's fairly reliable. So I think there is a very slight taper. So this is the smaller side. Let's see if it fits on the smaller bore of the instrument. It does. So yeah, the YouTube is keyed. You only want to put it on one side. It will also match the contour of the base of it will match the gasket. You'll prevent any developing leaks that way by putting it on the right way. And it should, on most instruments, look like this on both sides, where you have this threaded screw coming up. For whatever reason, my threaded screw, this part of it, which is tapped into the base plate, just comes out easier than the part that goes into the screw head, and I never bothered to actually change it. So I've got these ones are keyed to be very obvious because one of them actually goes into the metal plate here, and the other one goes just on the top like it's supposed to. And if your gasket is in good shape, you want these to be tight, but they only need to be finger tight. So what I do, I go until they feel like they're tight on either side, and you do alternate sides to check, and then you grab with something that you can get a little bit more torque on. And you just give them that little extra bit. And this both makes sure that you're not over torquing the screws, and it makes sure that you can get it off the next time you need to. Then you just press the boot cap on, and that part of it is starting to look like an instrument again. Though I think I usually have it on the other side. Most boot caps don't have this thing, this little peg. It's threaded. I think it's for a post that a cello uses. It didn't come with the thing that sticks in there, so I've never used it. I still don't know exactly what it does. Which side do we want to do? Let's do this side first. So there's a couple of weird little quirks in this one that are kind of centered around the way this alternate B flat key and the G key and that kind of stuff go together. This might also be the one that needs the cork. Yeah, that's the one that needs the cork. So first things first, I think that's what we want to do. I'll put this back here. This over here, because this will need a little space, I think. So be forewarned, I am no expert in how to do corks well efficiently. The basics of it are pretty straightforward because you just need a little, physical dampening pad underneath the thing you're working on. So as long as your thickness is about right, and you cut it about the right shape, you can get that. I do have the original, so I can measure the thickness. The thickness is actually pretty important. You can get corks of all different sizes, but the thickness is pretty important to making it work right, because it controls how high or low the key will actually go. And in certain keys, like too thick of a cork will mean that your pad doesn't actually close all the way and you run into sealing problems. And too thin of a cork could mean that it runs into like something on the other side of the, another part of the action that either makes noise or prevents something else from working right, or makes so that there's a little play, so that on certain keys you'll put one down and it'll like take a second for the other one to engage, all making it kind of uncomfortable. But this one, if you can see it at all, is this little tiny like stub of a piece. This looks to be the right thickness. It's a very nice pattern. I like this looking cork. But I'm just going to like kind of eyeball the right size and then cut that little round end into it and just try to fit it to the bottom of this key. Because what I'm looking for is a little piece of cork to be a damper on this little like foot on this side of the key. So this one right now is a little too wide, but only slightly. And it looks like it needs to be a little shorter and then rounded at the end. Yeah. Since I already cut it, it makes it harder to kind of like narrow easily. I'm gonna see if this works at all. Pull this in a pair of pliers, and then to get it just a little narrower, I'm gonna use sandpaper. And try to just keep it parallel to the sandpaper. Sandpaper is very good for shaping corks. So if you want little rounded edges, if you need to like have tapers on it or whatever, this is a good way to do it. This is 400 grit, and it actually like seems to be pretty good for this kind of work. This is also, I will get a pair of tweezers. So when you're working with stuff this small and then you're trying to glue the parts down, it's nice to have something very small to work with as well. I apologize for the stomping. I don't think it's actually stomping. I think he just taps his foot when he plays sometimes, like when he's into it. And it's obvious through the floor. I'm just going to use the sandpaper to shape this end a little bit. Just want it to look rounded over. This is more cosmetic than functional, and it's cosmetic in a place that almost no one is going to see it. But it does fit the contour of the key better this way. So that's something, right? Gotta take pride in what you do. Alright, so that seems to be about the right size. So just like I was doing before, I'm just gonna glue it down. Yeah. Looks good. Might be even a slight bit high for like thick for the other side. It does compress just a little bit kind of as you do it. I say as you do it. It does compress a little bit as it's used. So having it be very slightly high, as long as it's not to a point that it's a problem, is okay. And this is actually the alternate B flat key. So this is both one that I use very, very little, and one that I know has a little bit of play in it to, because it's just pushing down a rod on the other side. And this is also one of the ones with a plating thickness issue on the top, so I don't think I can actually get it to be super, super shiny. That's too bad. So, the toothpick back, contact cement. Get a little bit of contact cement on here. And this is a little harder than it is normally to work with because this is already kind of dry. Like it's dried a little bit in the container. I just need new. It's not so bad. I'm going to use the tweezers to hold it while I apply the glue because it is sticky enough, even when it's not dry, it is sticky enough that it is difficult to hold and apply to a pad. And like I was saying the first time I contact cemented something, the way this is supposed to be applied is you apply evenly to both sides. You give it a second to kind of adhere down to where it is, which is gradually not working because it's drying on me. There is a time element to this that is being cut short because the contact cement is old. And you don't want it to be super thick, which is the other kind of problem I'm running into. But you'll give it just a second, and then when the surfaces are tacky, you just touch them together and push. And you really don't need to push hard, and you really don't need to like do much. Make sure that when you touch them together, you're pretty close to the spot that you want to be, because there's sometimes a little bit of play there, and there's sometimes very, very little. It can be very sticky very quickly. So that is a little warning if you're going to do that. I'm going to do the tip of this felt as well. It's also just peeling off, and I think it's thick enough that it shouldn't be a problem to leave it here. It also looks like this is one that contacts a post rather than contacting like the body of the instrument, because there's like a little, probably not visible on the camera, but there's a little indent like right here in it. So I don't think the felt being particularly like thick and supple on the front of the key is particularly important. Whereas if it was contacting the body of the instrument, or if it's contacting another key, you want it to be kind of as thick and as plush as possible for the given thickness, so that it, you know, reduces the sound. The kind of converse part of that is that if it's thinner or harder, while the sound is going to be louder, it's not going to feel as spongy when you're pressing it down, so there is a little bit of a fine line to walk there. But I think that solves this key. We will see if this is too thick of a, what's it called, cork, when it goes back on the instrument. I don't believe it is, though. It's pretty close to the original. And let's do these ones. So, if I remember right, this key is kind of annoying to do because of the way it links into this lower stuff. And then the other key has to go under it, yeah. If this is visible, you've got this ring here, goes around this tone hole, and then it spans between these two posts. This one goes here, and the other one that I just fixed goes here. And both of them have these little indents so that their actuating mechanism can go underneath the one that's going across for the G key, but that means they have to be put in place first. And this is the weird screw, the one screw that's like this on the instrument, and this seems to be consistent among instruments. So there's a pivot screw end, and then this part actually just goes through this key and is threaded right before it gets to the pivot screw. So it's kind of a combination of both. So for that, you do your normal thing like you would for a screw that goes through the whole key, because it still does for part of it. And then on the other side, where there's a pivot screw end, you just pack the grease in there. I can put that on the ground, as you would a normal one. And that's all greased up. So we start with this one, the long one. And this end goes over. It's not peeling. No, good. The end goes over to actuate a rod, but the rod won't be put in until we actually start working on the other side. So you get this one in place. I engaged a spring under it to kind of make sure that I don't have to do it later, make sure that I don't miss it. That's actually a very common thing when you reassemble an instrument, that if you're not paying close attention to the springs, you'll just have one that isn't engaged and a key won't move, and it'll take a while to figure out. So it's not the end of the world if it happens like that. You know, if worse comes to worse, you have to take off a key to put that spring on. But if you just catch it as you're putting it on the instrument, you ever run into that. You don't have to deal with that. We'll see how reliable I can be We'll see if it works the first time when I start up after it's all assembled. Screw is in. Get the extra grease. And this is another one where it does kind of go down. It feels a little limp, like it does return up, but it doesn't feel very sturdy. And this will feel normal when the other keys are in place. It's just not to that point yet now. In the same way, this one's a little goofy. But the thing with the B key, or the alternate B flat key, is that it's actually going to have, like, what's it called? Words. Words are escaping me. It's going to have the pin through to the other side. So this one actually doesn't have a spring on it at all, looks like. Do I see a little spot for one? There was not a spring to engage into it, though. And there is not... Oh, there is. Ooh. Well, I'll have to see if this causes a problem. I don't believe there has been a spring in this for the duration I've had this instrument. But it looks like there is a hole in the bottom of this post, because the way these pin springs work, there's a hole through the post underneath it. And you'll basically put this piece of spring wire, which I do have some if I need to add it, put this piece of spring wire in through it, and then you kind of kink the end so that when you jam it into the post, the like kinks make friction and let it keep it from pulling out. You can also like squeeze it really hard, like with a press or something, to flatten the wire a little bit, which does the same kind of thing. And that holds it in the end of the post. But this one, yeah, it looks like at one point it had a spring under there, and I don't believe it did when I took this off, when I took this key off of the instrument, and it was working fine before. It's not a key I use a lot, but it was working fine, so I'm not going to mess with it. I'm just going to leave it like this and see, hope. So this ring key goes on next, and this is a regular one. The only thing is that the part that this connects to on the end is also kind of trapped within several posts and like has a bunch of motion constraints on it, so it can be difficult to get it like properly aligned. You can leave this one either not fully screwed in, or like you leave one pivot screw out or something to try to get the angle on the other one right, but I think I'm going to be able to get it okay with this one fully screwed down, so I'm just going to do that. So this is another one. Engage the spring. Well, okay, so you get the it's a little more complicated than that. You get the on the pivot screw, and then it goes through this channel, and now it can't flex over enough to engage the spring. So before you put the other pivot screw on, you take your screwdriver and you push the spring past the little thing that it has to catch on, so that it catches, and then you put the pivot screw in. Once it's in a couple of threads, you can spin it around and it won't fall off, which is nice. Ah, that's interesting. So that feels better. When I first put it together, this side, I was getting just a little bit of binding, and it seemed like it was not totally smooth in its action. I believe this is just that one of the posts on the end rotated very slightly so that it bound up against each other. Not actually a problem. You will see that it like comes up really high. Like if you're familiar with where this normally rests, this is like a really high spot for it to be, and if you let it, it just keeps going above that. It will just come up all the way here, and it'll actually come up far enough to undo the spring that I just engaged. But this will be trapped by the key that goes on it, so this is not actually like a problem with assembly. This is just, it's partially assembled. So let's put that key on it. This is the one that goes into like a oddly trapped spot here, but I think I can make it work fine like this. So pivot screws, so you pack the ends. Which reminds me, I did not wipe up the excess from the last one. Good to keep track of. I'm going to Oh no, that's right. You can engage, at least on this instrument, you can engage this one, engage the screw on this one, because this is complicated to explain. The fit is tight enough between this post here and this post here that if you come with this from this side, you can actually get it to pass. So if you engage the spring on this side like you normally would, and then you try to slide it into place this way, it will just not go because the metal is in the way. So what you have to do is you pass it over to the other side, the post, then you take out the pivot screw. This wasn't actually stopping it before, I remember this from before. Then you can get it into this side, and now the spring isn't engaged, but you can just take your screwdriver and get it to be engaged. I don't think you even have to take it off. Yeah, oh, it is a tight fit. Okay, so this is a thing that can happen. You get it on into the right place, but then you lift it up away from the instrument a little and slide the spring under it. When the spring is thick enough and the little lever that comes down towards the instrument is close enough to the instrument, you just kind of don't have the space to slide it under there. So if it's fully assembled, you actually can't engage the spring. But that usually means that if you disassemble it just enough to move the rod around like a little up and down vertically, it should be fine. So let me clean up the excess grease so that we don't cover ourselves in grease for the next couple days of practicing. And now you can see that the G key that had come up super far before, now it has a maximum limit on how far it can go because this key is down. And it also is not like, it's just kind of limp to some degree on its own because there are other keys that push down on it still. It's a complicated little set of things here. This. Now which one to do next? I think this one is the right one. Yeah. The order is important for these because sometimes even when you can put multiple keys in a different order, like the access to the screw is blocked by one side or another. And I think by putting in the next key, this screw is at least much harder to screw in, if not impossible to screw in. It does take a little trial and error. It is different for different instruments, like the fine positioning of the keys matters a lot for this. And I think with a lot of newer instruments, it's actually a little more forgiving than this one is. I'm not sure a lot of attention was made towards optimizing that in this design. This is another one where I engage the spring before it's kind of set into place, just because it's convenient to do and because you have to reach a screwdriver under quite a bit to get that fixed. If you don't. This is one of those weird through screws that actually insets into the post a little bit. It's always been strange. But that feels okay. This one's still not holding up, but when you get the pin through and the part from this side, it will be fine. So now I do that one, I believe, and then this one last. Pad looks okay. There is a felt on this one, but it looks fine. A little grease on the screw. And I'm putting it a little beyond the post and then dragging it close so I can catch the spring that's under it. And I miss the spring. I still miss the spring. Alright, I'm just going to do it the regular way. Just manually engage. And this is where the spring hook can come in handy, because you can only push from one direction with a screwdriver. With multiple screwdrivers, you can obviously do more than that, and it can be tricky to do, but kind of interesting at least. But with a spring hook, you can kind of grab onto it and then push or pull in a couple directions at once, which makes it much easier to navigate around things. The spring hook is a little thicker than some of the other, than a blade of a flathead, for example, so there are certain spaces that it's a little harder to get into. That looks okay. And it seems to be actuating as you would expect it to. It's good to check your work as you're going. You're not going to be able to get everything this way, because it is, like, parts of it are kind of a complicated system, but it will prevent you from running into errors later on that actually do cause problems. I don't know how audible it is, but there's a little concert going on upstairs, apparently. Gonna slide this one in. If I can get that screw out. It's a tighter fit than the other ones. There it is. Okay. So this side is almost done. Stuff feels normal. They don't seem to be impeded. We got one more right at the top. This is another tricky one just because of the location. Not actually a complicated one to get in there, you just have to like kind of get it in the right angle. And this one does, like the pad on it, I've known actually for multiple times I've assembled it now, is a little grimy and it doesn't seem quite ideal. The reason why I haven't replaced it is that this spring tension is actually very high, and because of its placement on the instrument and like the way you use it, it's not so bad for the spring tension to be very high. So I've just been kind of accepting it. There probably is like a better way, you know, like if I replaced the pad, it probably would not require the same amount of force to seal. It got trapped in a way that I wasn't expecting it to. Let me see if I can get the spring under it. What was I saying? Yeah, it would be able to be actuated with less force, but since you're basically pressing down on it with like the side of your hand rather than a finger, I don't actually care about that. It's fine if it takes a lot of force to actuate. So I'll just let it do that and then not have to replace the key. Though you do, as I've found out now, you do have to get the spring engaged when you put it in, because the spring will not fit under there, and it's actually too narrow of a space for the spring hook. There it is. Is it? There it is. No? It's okay, there it is. You don't do that very often, but I was spinning and it wasn't like biting into the threads, which if you do that enough will just like kind of mar the inside face of the post, which is not going to be visibly that bad, but not a good policy. So now we've got this whole side of the instrument assembled and at least appearing to be functional. I'm going to work on the other side, and I'm going to be careful not to flip it over, because the next step is making sure you get all the pins in the right places. Because as I mentioned yesterday when we took them out, the length of them is important. That's how you get the right feel out of the keys that go through the instrument. So now that they're in here, if I turn it like this, I just dump them out, and then they can, you know, be very easily confused. So I'll clear a little space so I can actually like have it like that on the bench. The bench being a bunch of cloths in my kitchen table. And we'll start putting stuff on again. I think the B-flat key can be fairly early, but I will maybe want to do like this one first. This is another one where order can be important, and I don't really remember the order, but you think about it a little bit and you can usually figure it out. This should be okay to do whenever. This key is actually only actuated from the other side of the instrument, so I don't have to worry about anything that's like pressing on the top of it here. So it's kind of a freebie. Get it greased. I don't seem to be able to catch the spring, but there's lots of clearance so I can get it with a screwdriver. And we'll use this one.
This is one where the spring hook would actually help, because I have to push it across and down to get it around correctly. And maybe it doesn't quite have clearance. Or actually, maybe it's too long. Yeah, it seems to be running into the other post. So this is maybe an error for whoever put it in originally. Not a significant one, I would say. Yeah. So if you can kind of finagle the angle when you're putting it back, you can't just catch it like that. And that's significantly easier. See if this is too wide for this key. No, that's okay. And that's one of the, what are they called? Pins going through that is now capped off. So this one will go here, but not yet. This one will go here. Oh, but that goes, so this is another thing worth keeping track of. This one has the under part of this like linkage, and this one goes over it. So if I put this one in second, I could be blocking access to this one. I don't think it actually works out that way in this case. I think you could do it in either way. But I'll do this top one instead then. Actually, ooh. Then I will wait, because I found that this screw, this pivot screw, is one that I left unscrewed a little bit, so that's the one that I removed when I took it off, which means that the piece that goes between here has to happen probably before these ones, because that'll block the way you get at the screws. I'll do B-flat key, because I'm pretty sure this one is a freebie, as I said. It's off to the bottom, it doesn't block things. It does actually go over top of a pin, but and actually a pin and the key that actually like actuates it, but it can be lifted up as long as you don't have the B-flat guard on, so that's fine. That is not the threaded end. Yeah, this is another one that like, it looks just a little grimy, but the pad is actually like pretty soft, so I don't think it's in bad shape. This is not something I normally do, but something I said that I'd do on the other side yesterday, because there is, as you can see, just a little bit of discoloration around the tone hole, and I believe that is the same from the last time I did this. Like, I don't think this has gotten any worse, but if it is getting worse, I need to know. So I'm going to take a picture of it, and now I'll know if next time it looks worse. Actually, take a second. So that if there is actually any like leaking water that's fouling up the tone hole, and it could cause damage to the instrument over time, or I guess is actively causing damage that's maybe insignificant at the moment, then I'll know about it and I'll be able to have it like properly fixed. Get that screwed in. Use the other screwdriver. Some of the angles you have to get at things are a little annoying. But I guess they gotta cram all the keys on there somewhere, and just making them longer or stick out farther is just gonna make the whole thing heavier, so it's probably not worth it. Let's do this one then. Yes, this is the correct one to do, I think, because I know that this key, this little one, goes on top of it, like this. So I'll put this one on, then I'll put this one on, then I'll put this one on, then I'll put this one on. Order is important. A little more grease. That's way too much. This pad is really small for the key cup, but I can see from the indent on it that it's actually just covering a small tone hole, so that really isn't that much of a problem. And it looks like it's the right height and all that. It was fine before. Get this one backed out. And slide it back together. That has engaged properly. And that's in there like that. Now we'll get this little paddle that goes over that keycap, and then over the pin going to the rest of the instrument. Just a little, feel a little like grindiness in there, but I think that's just when the what's it called? The threads are in the way. And actually, it's very good that I did this one at this time, because putting it in from this side means that if I had this key in, I would have blocked access to that screw head. So, this was the right way to do it. I either sort of remembered somewhere in the back of my head, or I just mathed it out in the right way. I'll take either one. That's in, another pin through secured. I got this one. And this is not a felt that needs to be replaced. I think I got the only cork that I was suspecting needed replacement, but I think there is another felt on here that I saw taking off that looked a little sketchy. Get the spring engaged, even though this is a particularly stiff one. Ooh. So this key apparently was the wrong order, because that key is now blocking access to this one, this little screw. So that's one not in the right order, because I don't, well, maybe I can make this work. It's not a good policy to use a screwdriver like this over another key, yeah, so I won't do it now, because when you're rotating it, you'll be just, scraping on the finish of the other one. So just temporarily, this one comes off so I can get that screw head in. Come on. Get that one screwed down, get that one replaced. Not the end of the world. Clean up the grease. Replace this one again. Feels like it's still okay. And I'm trying to finagle it to catch the spring. Okay, yeah, it's a crafty one, because this is another pretty tight fit between the posts. It seems to be doing better, gradually regaining its keys. But this one's a tight fit between the posts, so what I did is this side of it, where the spring engaged, I got that engaged with it off axis here, and then passed it in through this side instead of pushing it in through this side, because it didn't actually fit the other way. But by going around to the other side of the post, like, the angles were right to get it in the tighter space, and it worked fine. Now we get this little bridge, and that is the last one covering a pin, which we haven't dropped. So they're not missing and they're not out of order. That's enough, I think. How does this spring engage? It's on there. That'll work. Tighten down. Looks good. Now I've got two more on this side and the guard. The guard has the screws, which I have to be careful about losing because they're very small screws. And then just decide on which ones. I got the B-flat key and the E key, which I think, if I remember right from before, the E key goes last. even though the B-flat key is on the other side. It might not actually matter, but seems like something I have made a mistake on before, so try to do it the right way. Felt looks good. Oh, actually, the felt is peeling a little bit, so maybe I'll get that. The cork is fine. So let's get the contact cement back. Here we go. Toothpick. Get a little bit on there. And because it's a peeling one, so it's, you know, kind of split already and holding itself together, I just kind of mashed the toothpick in there a little to try to get it to be adhering to both sides. Now, if I was doing this in a better fashion, I would have cleaned the surfaces first, because it's going to adhere better to, well, it's going to adhere about the same to whatever's on the surfaces, but if what's on the surface is dirt, that's not going to be adhered to the surface of what it is very well. So best practice is to clean it up first. I think this will be sufficient. Again, these are like, it's good to have them held on, but even if I like didn't do anything with this and left it flapping in the wind, it'll be fine until the next time I do this, at least, because nothing ever picks at the underside of it. Like it's never going to have the force that's pulling it off, because it's only just being compressed against the instrument. Anyway, back to putting it in. So this one has to be, this end of it has to be under the B-flat key. You gotta engage the spring. And then actually put this through, which goes right by, if you can see that, goes right by the ring. But it fits. It works okay. They did actually plan when they did this. Even if it's tight. Sounds okay. There's a little play in here, which is not ideal. But it's not loud. It's just that there's like, I can feel, so the play is between, this is a complicated one. So you push down here and it lifts up this pad, which pushes on this, which pushes down the rod, which goes under here to push this up and close this key. Complicated. But the place where the play is happening is either that the rod is not quite long enough, or that the felt under here or under that touches the rod is not quite thick enough. So there's just a little bit of movement there that makes a little extra noise and uncertainty when you're going forward. Now, since it's on a, what's it called, a thumb key, it doesn't matter as much because you're usually pushing those pretty hard. Like your thumb is a strong finger. And I don't think, because I was keeping track of which pin is which, I don't think this is a pin distance thing. Because if you had them in the wrong order, this could be the same kind of cause. But I'm going to leave it for now, and if it bothers me when I'm actually playing, I'll just maybe cut a new pin, maybe put a little extra felt on the underside of these. There are some options. I'm not exactly sure what the best one is overall, but there are things that you could try. Felt is okay there. Pad looks okay. This is the last key on the boot. Gotta get that spring again, and it's in a weird spot, so I'm going to use the screwdriver to put it on, even though it's not actually screwed down. This is a spring hook, is a better one, because you have to go 2 dimensions at once. Right.
easy.
When you have the right tool for the job, it makes a big difference sometimes. Screwdriver. Get the extra grease. Now everything is on. It seems to be generally working. Everything feels like it's about right. There is that little play there that I might end up doing something about, but not today. So I'll put on the B flat guard. And I like to hold this off for last because, as I said in taking it off, the screws that you're using for this are going straight into the wood. So I want to not have to take this off as many times as possible. Like, I want it to be just in place as much as possible, whether that's off or on. Just because it's going to decrease the wear and tear on the wood itself, which is good. Even though this is a thick part of the wood, like, it's not at any risk of like penetrating the bore or anything like that, but still very, very useful, I think. You get both of them in place, and then you torque them down. This goes for like basically anything. This is something I used for like electronics and other kinds of repair as well. When you're tightening something down and you want it to be like even and precise, you get the screws in place with a little bit of play in them, and then you go around either circularly, or if you're trying to be really, really careful, you go like star patterns. Like if you've got like a ring of screws, like a dozen of them or something, you would do like this one, and 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 kind of go around that way. Just to make sure that the pressure shared among them is as even as possible, and if they're used for centering things, which they usually are, you kind of have that as nailed down as possible. That feels pretty good. It looks fine. There's some keys here that like I polished for a while and I couldn't really get that level of tarnish off. I know this needs to be replated at some point, but that is kind of price permitting, I think. I also don't know how long it takes, so that's something. Excuse me. Get a drink. We got one more left, and this one is super light without all the keys on it. This also might be worth taking a picture of the high E flat and E tone holes, because they look a little suspect. Again, I think this is the same way they looked the last time. It's just good to keep track. And since it's so easy to take a picture, like having a visual record for the next time that you take it apart and see them is, it's trivial to do. So why not? That looks fine. Yeah. So where do I want to start here? Let's do... So the whole stack of keys that are centered around the whisper key are kind of tricky because the order matters a lot for them. And maybe for that I'll just kind of start with those and then probably build out and do this side, what would be the front side of the instrument first. But the important thing to remember is that the whisper key goes first. The whisper key goes first, and then the bridge that's under the C sharp and B flick keys goes second. And if you can get those two, you probably won't be stacking lots of keys on each other that will have to be removed to do it again later, which happens. But the whisper key in particular, it's got like 4 connections or something on this one. It's just a bit of a problem. It also happens to be that one of the noisiest keys on my instrument, just going from this side, because it's got just a little bit of play between the 2 posts, so it's especially annoying. Oh, and the felt needs glue. And I think rather than replace, I will just glue again. There's probably a more methodical way to go through and like catch these initially, but whatever. I never claimed to be the most time efficient with this kind of operation, so this will work fine. And again, cleaning the surfaces would be better than what I am currently doing. Also, using a new felt is probably better because the glue gets into the like texture of the felt. And additionally, using fresh glue, well, it should matter because this stuff is old and shows it. It's like kind of sticky and runny coming right off of this. So in terms of adhesion, this is on the low side. But again, it doesn't need a ton to be reasonably effective, at least in the short term, at least for the next year or two. So by the time I do this again, I'll have better glue. And maybe I'll replace a couple of the felts. I think if you just replace the most problematic ones each time, then you'll eventually get just good ones. Or good enough ones, I guess. Little granules. Contact cement. Okay, now it can go on. Gotta get it oriented right. It's also, like, just because there's so many posts in this area, it's a little tough to figure out which one it goes into. But if you know, like, what side is facing what on the instrument, which actually needs to be on this side, because I know that it goes in from this side, the distance between the posts for all of these are basically different. So if you get it to the right general area, if you just try it between the posts, you will eventually find the right one. It does work pretty well that way. And at least for a short period, it'll be a nice quiet whisper key with very little play. And the grease will work its way out and it will be noisy again, because it always does that. That was a slip that could have done damage. I don't believe it did. But something to still be careful of. Going on autopilot is a little easy, and I don't think I have the very best habits built into my autopilot. I haven't. I know that, like, products like that exist, maybe even for pads. Generally, like, I haven't. So when they start to harden up, as long as the key is, like, still putting them down in the same place, the suppleness doesn't matter as much because it's kind of conformed to the shape of the tone hole to some degree. So I haven't really run into a lot of leaks that are caused just by hardening of pads, unless they get really, really hard, and then I wouldn't want to just use a conditioner. Like, I just want to replace the pad anyway. So yeah, I haven't done any conditioning like that. I wonder if, like, the oiling of the bore contributes to that at all. Like, if the oil from that gets in there. I know that too much is a bad thing, but maybe the residual that's on the instrument kind of helps in a way with that. Not entirely sure. Especially if you're only replacing a couple of pads, it's usually cheap enough that, like, if you just know which ones you're replacing, then you can buy those, and it's not. They can be more of a consumable, you know, because it's not going to be every 5 years that you have to replace a given pad, even in, like, a rough area of the instrument, like maybe whisper key, with the exception of that. So if you're going to get 10 years life out of them and it's like a few bucks a pad, it's not so bad. So I got those two, and this is the start of the kind of bridge that goes across the instrument. So I think I'm going to do that rather than build up that side first. So this one goes on top, I know that. This one goes underneath things. It goes here. Yes? Yes. Checking distance and then checking the lineup point on this side. It's like right up there too. Okay. So get it in there, engage the spring on the other side, and get the screw back. Okay, now we've got the ring key on this side. And I think this is probably a good general reassembly order. I've done this wrong before, but this one seems like you get these keys in place and you'll be fine for the rest of it, basically. A little more on that. think. Yeah, it is from that side. Tricky to get the spring engaged, but possible. Keep it from rolling around too much, though. That can cause problems. I'm over carpet, so it's not the end of the world, but you really don't want things falling. In fact, doing this in your lap is probably riskier than doing it on a table. It's just this table, with the size that it's got, was taken up entirely by bassoon parts when the thing was disassembled. So there's not really the workspace there. And I feel like I'm a little more comfortable working closer to me, so I'd have to be like more under the table, and then it's a little high. And yeah. All that. Alright, so the kind of under keys for this joint are now like all in place. Now the order matters less. I think I'm going to do just this side first, finish it up. And for this one, it's just one rod that goes through both keys. So I'll just grease each one like it was its own key. Make sure they get individually enough. This is also one on my instrument that catches a little because there's a slight bend in this one. It wasn't my doing. And the keys actually work fine, even though there is a bend. It's just when you're taking it in or out, it kind of catches in a obvious way. Like that. But because the bend is kind of at the space between where the two halves of the key meet, it doesn't actually affect the way they play in any way that I've noticed. Just feels bad when you're doing this. Alright. And these are another one with relatively tight spring tensions. So it takes a little bit of pressure when you're kind of getting them aligned properly. Here's the halfway point. Okay, it's already in that one. It also might be that this post is moving just a little bit. It seems to flex. There it is. There we go. That is in. Both of the springs are engaged properly. So that side is done. And the noise that I'm getting on this side is not actually like play in the mechanism so much as it is a slight staggering of the time that they lift up. And I've actually found that this is helpful. For whatever reason, when you're going for a high E, if you have the E key raised a little bit before the E flat key, it seems to speak better. At one point in one of my servicings, I corrected it because I noticed that there was a little bit of play and that was happening. And then it was harder to get the high E to speak with the fingering. So, yeah, I uncorrected it. Interesting problem to run into. I don't remember, that's this side, okay. So these ones are all these thumb keys that we love so much. Once you get those under ones on, the order is not super important, so just starting with the lower one. Make sure everything's aligned, the spring's in its little set point. There we go. And it's quick. Try to get. these two, not those two, or those two. I think it is these two. Yeah, these two go together. So those have to be put on at the same time, but they can be put on kind of whenever, so I'm going to do the A flick first. And it's from this side. If that looks okay. Get it in its little keeper. Certainly louder than I was expecting. I don't know if that's uncharacteristic though. It's just a cork pad, and it's actually a newer cork pad. I wonder if something about the spring is different. It does feel very, very strong for the spring. I'll have to see when everything's back together, but that is more noise than I remembered for just it smacking down on the instrument, but that may actually be correct. These are which side? These are from this side. So because these two have to be put on at the same time, I'm going to grease up both, get them both ready to go before I make any moves. It's the other way. Thanks. Should be good. This is the end of it. Done it a few times before. I've got to read soaking so that I can actually verify it as well, but I'm not worried at the very least. Oh, and I have pizza dough defrosting, so I have a dinner to look forward to as well. All right, so these ones, I believe something about the diameter of them might be different. So there, you can actually tell these two screws apart, but because it is, it's still something you want to be aware of. You just don't want to screw up and put them in the wrong place. I'm going to put them the way they're aligned there. That was words. I'm going to put them down in the little plastic tray that I've got in the way they will go in on the instrument, like in the positions they'll go in. Just so that I make sure I don't put the wrong one in the wrong spot and, end up messing with something. There's also these two springs in the bottom to engage into their spots here, which looks good now. And then that looks okay. There's a lot of stuff that these two keys fit into because they have to mesh with each other. They have both a little container thing here, and then they have the springs to line up on this side. So it's a lot to do, but it does all fit together, and you can, once it's in place, just kind of hold it down with your finger and drive both of the screws in, and then it won't go anywhere. Close. There we go. This one is in now. Okay. And that's 5 here. Then we just got the whisper key. Both the key itself for the very top going on the vocal, and then the little extension piece for the low E. Clean it with this, because I haven't been cleaning a lot of the grease up properly. Alright. So now you got these two, which both stack on keys that are already on there. This one will go on the underside, so I'll put this one on first. They actually move around enough that it may not matter, like you can just kind of manually finagle them into place if you need to. But I'll do it the right way. and both very easy to put on. Cork looks fine. And this key is just free moving. It's got no spring on it, so until you have the key above it, it will just do that. And that's actually the same with the whisper key. Before the top key is on that stops itself moving on the vocal, it'll just go up all the way and like contact the bottom of the instrument, which is substantially farther below it. And this is probably the nastiest looking pad on the instrument. That is pretty typical of a whisper key, because that's going to be like just a pad that gets a lot of contact on it because it's right sticking out of the instrument. It also gets whatever water is coming through the vocal, which in my case is a decent amount because the vocal I've got has the water tube going in from the little hole on it actually broken off, which didn't really affect the way it plays, which I'm very thankful for because it's a good vocal. But I do have to be careful with the way water collects in it now. And I know that it collects more than it would have with that tube intact. So that is, that's a pad that I have replaced a couple times on this instrument, and will probably continue to do every, 5 years or so as it looks like it needs it. I want to treat it well, but it's one that takes some abuse. Got a little bit of grease to clean up. Then just kind of give everything a feel, and then I'll take it for a spin. Play some notes. Yeah, man, that's such a different feeling when it's all freshly greased. And it's there are a couple of keys that make some noise, but it is remarkably quiet compared to where it used to be. Get some of the grease off my fingers at least. Since it's all on the key work is already, I don't really have a problem picking it up and playing on it like this though. Let's see if I missed anything. Wing first. And I do actually have one more thing to do after this, because I was going to record the vocal, but I figure this is most of the work, and this is kind of its own topic. The vocal's kind of a separate thing. So I'll just play on it to verify that it's fine, and then I'll go and swap the cork on the good vocal as well. So, nice and shiny, like it's brand new, even though the wood is a little shinier because of the bore oiling. It's all very spiffy, nice. Vocal still fits. Shouldn't be a surprise. Since my fingers are greasy, I don't want to touch the blade. And then turn on the volume just a little. Seems like it's the same scale. Like the lack of noise in the keys is staggering compared to what it was. That wouldn't actually make those keys super noisy though. Like it's only note, it's not key clack. Yeah, so it works. I didn't forget any pieces, there aren't any springs disengaged, there's no pads that fell off or that aren't sealing. I don't think that reed is really good enough to give it like a proper check on the low register, because I haven't played it in a couple days and it actually hadn't had a lot of work when it was done that way. But aside from a final leak check that has not been a problem in the past and requires a better read, I'm gonna call that done. This was 2 hours worth on the second day to put everything together. I streamed for about 3 hours the first day, not including some of the breaks, and I did 2.5 hours worth of polishing off stream in between the two. So that will give you about 7.5 hours in total that I spent on just overhauling this whole thing. It probably would have been an hour or so faster if I wasn't, taking the time to explain or demonstrate stuff. But that ballpark, like 6-ish hours, is what it's typically took, and makes it kind of a significant operation. You can see why it would be expensive if you send it to a tech to do this, because it's not terribly complicated, but it is very labor intensive. But like I said, thanks for watching. I'll have some VODs up on YouTube at some point this week, probably, because this is all sort of a companion to the website that's up in the top over there, I guess. That I originally documented this procedure more or less the same, 5-6 years ago. But yeah, thanks for watching. I do appreciate it.